Ladies and gentlemen, I'll agree with the defense that we do appreciate your time and your attention in this case, and you guys have been cooperative with us, and we do appreciate that. I'd like to start off by talking about this idea that Mr. Matos is not guilty by heat of passion, okay? Because there was a lot of focus that he's not guilty because of his primal instincts, his rage, his heat of passion, as it was described to you by the defense, okay? The court's going to instruct you on what is the heat of passion, and the title really is the heat of passion upon adequate provocation. We kind of leave off this adequate provocation part, but it's really kind of the essential part of this heat of passion. Defense is correct. There are 5 elements we have that have to be proven to you, all 5 of them, if you're going to believe that he was not guilty by heat of passion upon adequate provocation. And I'm going to tell you right now that he's guilty of murder in the first degree, premeditated, based on the evidence in this case, and that heat of passion does not apply to any of the crimes that he's been charged with. And it's really because the first element of this heat of passion, adequate provocation, isn't happening. I'll read it to you. It says, there must have been a sudden event that would have suspended the exercise of judgment in an ordinary, reasonable person. Okay? This sudden event type scenario. So to kind of take a step back, why we have this in the law is you can think about a situation where a husband goes away on a long business trip. He comes home late at night, unexpectedly, goes into his house, takes off his clothes, walks into his bedroom, and sees his wife in bed with another man, and he loses it. He walks into a situation he had no idea about. It's a sudden event. Grabs the lamp, hits him over the head, and he dies, right? The sudden event was so blinding, as the law will tell you, that he loses his sense of reason. The evidence in this case is pretty clear because he admits to it that he went into that house without them knowing. He thrusted himself into this situation. The defense wants to say that this situation was thrusted upon him, but in all reality is they didn't want him at that house. That was adequately communicated to him. Leave now, calling the cops. She's crying, and all the things that we'll talk about in a minute. Goes in, breaks into another house, smokes cigarettes. He wants to tell you that he's chilling out during that time, but the reality is that he's probably stewing, getting hot, texting, no one's responding. Can't take it anymore, goes back to the house. He thrusted himself into that situation. It wasn't sudden upon him, and therefore it's not heat of passion. You can't walk into a bad situation and say, oh, well, I didn't know it was going to be a bad situation if I showed up, and then say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, cut me some slack in this situation because, you know, I know that I shouldn't be there, but I showed up anyway, and I deserve some break because of that. It's not true. He gets no credit for being there. He injected himself, and therefore it's not heat of passion. But if you think that somehow it is, this sudden event is somehow thrusted upon him, it has to be a reasonable person would have lost normal self-control and would have been driven by a blind and unreasoning fury. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the events of that earlier that morning, the only person that was acting with a blind and unreasonable fury was Mr. Matos. As he waited for Megan to come home, confronted her with a knife, and he wants to say, I didn't point it at her, but here he is trying to, as he said, I wanted to tell her the truth. Well, he's trying to get her to tell him the truth as he's holding a knife in his hand. Blind and unreasonable fury, that's Adam Matos. He had that all day. That there was not a reasonable amount of time for a reasonable person to cool off. Well, if you believe Mr. Matos' testimony, he had ample time to cool off about what was going on, right? He wants to say, I was just sitting around chilling and smoking cigarettes and playing on my phone while they're doing what they're doing. I just decided I'm going to head over there and see what's going on. I'm not going to announce myself. I'm not going to go to the front door. I'm not going to knock. I'm not going to say, hey, I just want my stuff, or hey, I just want to say bye to Tristan. He sneaks into the house, surprises them in the bedroom. And just remind you that this situation is that no one's saying they were engaged in any type of activity or anything of concerning behavior that would send him into this rage. And finally, the other thing that as to this heat of passion and why is that Adam Matos was in fact so provoked and did not cool off before he committed the acts that caused the deaths of these individuals. Well, you can't inject yourself into a situation as hostile as this was going to be and not expect it to be a bad situation. He doesn't get to telling the benefit of, I'm just going to walk in and everything's going to be okay. And I don't have to start with anyone. Doesn't announce himself. Doesn't act in a reasonable and prudent manner as to someone who would want to just do the things that he says. He doesn't do that. This is not heat of passion on an adequate provocation because he put himself into the situation at the house. He knew that he was not supposed to be there. He knew that he was not wanted there. It was clear to him. Megan called the cops on him.
9 Hatteras Drive.
Spell the street name for me, please.
Please,
Ma'am, can you spell the street name for me, please?
Hatteras Drive, Hudson, Florida.
Okay, and it's 7119?
7137.
Ma'am, it's going to be okay. 7119? Okay, what is your name?
Adrian Brown.
What is it? What is your first name?
Adrian Brown, like the color.
Okay, Megan, I'm not finding a 7119 Hatteras Drive. That's in Hudson? Is it 77? Megan, you gotta focus with me, man. Is it 7719?
No, it's 70. One second.
No, it's not.
7719.
Okay, tell me exactly what
We
happened.
just moved here.
Tell me exactly what happened, Megan.
My son said, I just came home, and my son said, put a knife in my throat, and he cut my hand, and I'm like bleeding everywhere, and my son's freaking out. I really don't want to do this in front of him, but he just put a knife in my throat.
Where is he at?
He took off.
Okay, when did that occur?
I looked at this in my son's room, and my son woke up.
Okay, ma'am, he cut your hand with a knife?
Yes.
All right.
Bleeding everywhere.
And that's the father of your son?
Yes.
It's gonna be okay, ma'am. It's gonna be okay.
I'm sorry. Baby, look at me. You wanna play Among Us song?
Okay, so give me a,
It's okay, baby. I'm sure. It's enough to make about your husband's fault. Why you literally tried to kill him?
okay, you left in a vehicle or on foot?
On foot, he doesn't have a license. He probably has a
Just fix it, Jamie.
He had the bike, but he had no shirt on.
Okay, hold on, Megan. Hold on a second with me. Hold on with that. I've already got deputy dispatch for you, so give me a time delay, okay, when that happened, when he cut you with the knife.
He just did it 10 minutes ago.
Okay, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, what is his name?
Matos, Adammatos.
Okay, well, how old is he?
He's 28.
28? Okay.
Almost 29.
Okay, what is he wearing?
He was wearing no shirt when he left. I don't even remember what. If he was wearing shorts or not. If he is wearing shorts, if he can't wear shorts, then I won't.
Okay, which direction did he leave on foot? Like, where did he...
I don't know. To be honest, as soon as he left, I went and got his hair so he started to feel
Okay, Megan, do you need an ambulance?
I don't know. I just want someone to come here right now.
finger? What, how big was the knife?
It was a steak knife.
Okay, did he still have it on? Megan, oh, you need to calm down, man. Does he still have the knife on him?
No, it's in my bedroom right now. I'm trying to get mad there, but I don't want to touch it.
Okay, Megan, I need you to answer whether you want me to get an ambulance for you, okay?
I can't leave my son.
Okay, it's okay, but do you want an ambulance to respond with the deputies, ma'am, to check out your hand?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine.
I can't even look at it. It's so full of blood.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, and it's on your hand?
Yes, my thumb, my left hand, on my thumb. I'm putting the knife in my kitchen.
Okay. Now, do you know if he has any other weapons on him?
I have no idea.
Okay. Is he on drugs or alcohol?
Alcohol.
Okay. Is he thin, medium, heavy?
He's like 6'2", he's medium built. You would think he was skinny, but he's a little bit meaty.
Okay.
But compared to people here in Hudson, he's medium.
Okay. Think he'll be violent with law enforcement officers?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
It's okay, ma'am. Do you think he'll be violent with law enforcement officers?
Violent?
Yes, ma'am.
I have no idea. This is the first time he's ever acted you. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, Megan. Don't apologize. Do not apologize. It's quite all right. What was going on? You guys
Come here.
okay. You guys had some kind of argument, or what was going on?
We haven't been together for weeks now because he doesn't do anything. And I went out with my friends and I came home at like 5 in the morning and he got all pissed off and he was drinking. And he just put a knife right to my throat. And he was gonna fucking kill me.
Okay. Is he known to carry weapons?
Because I went out.
Okay.
Oh, man, my fingers. Oh. Oh, man.
Okay, ma'am. I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? How old are you?
I'm 27.
27.
7/15/87 was my birthday. I just turned 27. Hello? Hello?
I'm still with you, Megan.
Okay, oh my God. Okay, that's not able. Sure.
Okay, where are you bleeding from, ma'am?
My left thumb. I'm free to get off now.
Your left thumb?
So bad, but I don't know. I was wondering. I just grabbed the knife when he put it to my throat.
Okay, is your bleeding normal for you?
I coagulate pretty well. So it's just very swollen.
Okay, is your breathing normal for you, Megan?
I'm sorry?
Is your breathing normal for you?
No. I have anxiety attacks, so to me this is normal, but to somebody else, no, it's not normal.
Okay, is the blood spurting or pouring out?
No, not anymore. I've been putting pressure on it. I'm thirsty.
It's okay. Oh, gotcha. Do you have a bleeding disorder or on blood there?
No, no.
Gotcha. Okay, ma'am. I'm sending the paramedics up now. Just stand on. I'll tell you exactly what to do next, okay? Okay, do not use a tourniquet, and I'm going to tell you how to stop the bleeding, okay? Listen carefully to make sure we do it right. If you haven't already, just get a clean, dry cloth or towel and place it right on the wound and press down firmly and don't lift it up to look, okay? Is the bleeding controlled now?
Yeah, I've been putting pressure on it.
Okay, you have a clean pressure on it. Okay, Megan, well, help is on the way, okay? You don't have anything to eat or drink. It might make you take your cough off the doctor, okay? And don't move around unless it's absolutely necessary. Just be still and wait for help to arrive. Now, where are you at right now, Megan?
I'm in my room with my son.
Okay, you're in your room. Okay, Megan, well, the deputies are almost there, okay? So, just go ahead and stay inside the house. Can you lock the door?
Yeah, I'm locking my son into my room because it's actually when I moved in here, there's a lock on the outside.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm gonna stand alone with you until the deputy gets there, okay?
Yeah.
Hey,
He's looking around, he's here, but he's gone up the road.
what's that?
He's looking for him.
Oh, the deputy, okay, yeah, he might not come directly to you.
Sure, I would. So scared.
It's okay, man, that's why we're here. We're here to help you, so.
I knew he was going to do that. I wouldn't even went out.
Gotcha, understand.
Oh my God,
And now you see the deputy, is he outside?
here, he's turning around.
Okay.
That's wonderful. Hey, thank God my son spoke up. He's here, he's looking at my car right now.
Okay, go ahead and answer it then, ma'am. That's the deputy, correct?
Yes, he's here.
Okay, I'll let you go, ma'am.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Okay.
Defense wants to say that state didn't present to you any evidence of premeditation. I'm going to suggest to you right now that it is very clear that that individual, Adam Matos, had an intent to kill that day. And that's probably the first of many pieces of evidence we're going to talk about that goes to his premeditation that day. To suggest that maybe Megan Brown's exaggerating anything on this 911 call, you know, you have to listen to it and you get to decide what the evidence is in this case. We talked about the fact finder, law applier role of the jury. Is her calming down and breathing deeply and trying to control her son in the room, is that an exaggeration or is that just a panicked woman after someone just held a knife to her throat, cut her, and threatened to kill her? You get to decide. And to suggest that if the defendant really wanted to kill her, that would have been the time and the place to do it. Well, Adam Matos admitted to being all sorts of things to you guys today. Killing the mother of his child right in front of his child as he laid there in bed, well, maybe that was just one of those things he just couldn't bring himself to do that morning. Had to come back and finish that job later. The evidence in this case points strongly to premeditation. So I'm going to take a minute to go through the evidence of premeditation. The fundamental thing I want to discuss the difference between is that every time the defense discusses premeditation, they associate it wrongfully with a plan. Nowhere in the law are you going to read that it says that Adam Matos has to have a plan. That's exactly how he's going to do it, how he's going to dispose of the bodies, how he's going to get away. Doesn't have to. Premeditation means an intent to kill. So let's go through all of the individuals and the evidence as it relates to them and this evidence of premeditation. And starting with, we suggested to you originally that Margaret Brown was the first individual killed. And again, as to this point, it doesn't matter the order. Nowhere in the evidence does it say that we have to prove to you the exact order in which they were killed. But we suggested to you, based on the evidence, that in order that it may have occurred. If you believe it was a different order, or the order of which he said, that's fine, as long as you agree that it was a premeditated killing. But the reason that we suggest that to you is because the evidence kind of supports that. The defense wants us to point it out to you, well, here you go. They don't want him in the house. They bring Nicholas Leonard. He tells his friends he's going over there with a gun, that if he feels threatened by Adam Matos, that he's going to kill him. There's evidence that locks were changed. They don't want him in the house. So it's not hard to imagine that if you don't want someone in your house, you lock the doors, right? So what's the one door that opens that no one's really paying absolute attention to at around 11:25 that night? Margaret Brown comes home, right? It's not hard to imagine that he's just waiting for that door to open and he can slip in, because we know that's where he kills Margaret Brown. He admitted that to you. It's not hard to imagine that's how he entered the house that day. To suggest that he said, oh, the doors are wide open. Really? Calling police, having people come there, having people come over with guns, so afraid that you're not going into work that you're just going to leave doors wide open? Do you think he wanted to sneak into that house? Because if he did want to sneak into that house, he would have just gone to the front door and gone, hey, I want my stuff. I want to say bye to my son. I'm leaving. I'm getting out of town. But that's not what he does. This idea that the garage door is so loud and obnoxious that would send warning signs to everyone in the house, it's just a normal thing. It's so normal that it gives him the opportunity to sneak into the house. Okay? Kills her in the downstairs west garage. Well, and a common theme you're going to hear with both Margaret Brown and Nicholas Leonard is that the number and the nature of the injuries can suggest to you premeditation, right? If it was just one hit on the head with a hammer, then maybe he just wanted to hurt and stun him. If it was 2 hits on the head, maybe it was, well, I just want to hit and stun him, and I want to disorient him, and I want to maybe knock him out. But when you hit a 52-year-old woman, 5'2", don't know what her exact weight was at the time, you get to see the pictures and see how she's moving around, just worked a full shift, probably didn't take much to overcome her, but he hits her in the head 9 times to kill her. Well, and we know not all injuries happened after the bag was put on her head, because there's blood evidence, right? We don't know what he hit her with. He says, I used the hammer on her, but it doesn't have to be the hammer. It could have been anything down there. Hits her in the head. She stumbles against the wall. She stumbles, and he puts her into the east garage, excuse me. The idea that the bag was put over her head, well, maybe he didn't want to kill her at that moment. Maybe he didn't think she was dead, and he just wants to gag her and keep her quiet, because he's going to go upstairs and take everyone else. Or maybe he knocks her out to such a state of unconsciousness that he thinks she's actually dead. Puts a bat over her head and says, listen, I'm just going to let her die. But she continues to fight. Says, well, can't have that. Whack one more time on the side of the head. Doesn't come back from that. And this idea that the bag's got to be punctured, well, these are kitchen garbage bags. They're actually designed not to puncture. That's kind of the purpose of those kind of garbage bags. These aren't like public shopping bags, which are thin and flimsy. These are garbage bags. They're designed not to puncture. And the fact that the bag's not punctured shouldn't suggest anything to you. Medical examiner suggests to you and tells you that the way that he looked at it, based on his experience, the bag was on the head when she got hit, that final time where she didn't move. She's bound and she's hog-tied with her arms behind the back because it's different. She was the first. Hadn't really figured out how he was going to kill everyone. But the nature and the location of those injuries indicates to you that it was premeditated. He wanted to die there. He has time to reflect as she stumbles down in the garage, as she moves into the other room, where she gets into the east garage, and there's those hits across the head where the blood expert told you that there was a bloodletting event, the spatter on the wall. There is time to reflect. There is repeated injury. That, ladies and gentlemen, is evidence of premeditation. So for them to say there's no evidence, well, look, there you go. There's some evidence as it relates to that. And there's plenty more about his intent as we get into the other ways in which she died. But to say that the eyelet, because the eyelet lock wasn't locked in the bathroom, ladies and gentlemen, what does that mean? Well, they're expecting Margaret Brown to come home. Why lock her out, when you have the garage door down? He doesn't have a garage door. He doesn't have a car, doesn't have a license. So it's this idea that he may just get in a car and drive to Guatemala. Well, it's kind of difficult to do without a driver's license. So this idea that there's no evidence of premeditation as it relates to Margaret Brown is incorrect and not supported by the evidence. Evidence is clear. Well, then he goes upstairs, and the fact that the dogs are barking is some sort of an indication someone's in the house. Well, if you have 20 small little dogs, and they was testified, these dogs are barking all the time, right? They could have barked when the garage door opened. They could have barked when the door was closed. There is nothing you can gain from the fact that there are 20 little dogs barking, and that somehow that should send shockwaves into everyone into the house as they to be alerted. But he testifies that he goes upstairs and he goes into Megan's room, and that's where there's a confrontation. Well, and if you really listen to his description of the event, well, that Nicholas Leonard appears out of nowhere and grabs him by the throat, holds him so that he can pull a gun out. Well, the whole purpose of a gun is they are designed to kill. They're designed to kill from a distance. That's what changed the whole world of warfare, the fact that you could kill someone from a distance. If he's holding a gun in his hand, there is no reason to get all up personal with him and try to hold him back. He can just say, hey, get back, get down, whatever it is that he wants to do. The reality is because that's just not how it happened. It's just not reasonable to think that's what it was. He had the element of surprise as it comes to those individuals in the house. They weren't expecting him to show up in the room, right? When you get stunned in a room by someone of his size, after having threatened to kill people with the knives, it doesn't take much to stun you. It doesn't take much to surprise you. And so, was there a struggle in that room? Absolutely. Did it happen the way that he said? Probably not, because the evidence suggests otherwise. The evidence suggests that there was a gunshot in the room that went out the door, or out the wall, that there was other weapons in the room. There was a knife that he admits that he sliced up his arms, and defense wants you to believe that that evidence in and of itself would instantly put him in an unconscious state. Again, brought the doctor back in here to clarify that issue if there was any ambiguity in his previous answers. He answered that for you today. That injury, combined with there was no other injuries. All right, this idea that he just goes unconscious. He needs him to be unconscious because in his version he brutally bludgeons him when he's unconscious. Well, that's not really supported by the evidence because there's no other evidence that he sustained any other injuries that would have led him to be unconscious. No injuries to any vital organs, no injuries of gunshot wounds to his head. Because the reality is that once he got the drop on them up in the room and was able to get on top of Nicholas Leonard on top of that bed, he was able to take that knife and he was able to beat him. And hit him. And hit him. And hit him. 21 separate injuries to the head. No evidence of premeditation that he wanted him dead. I got 21 pieces of evidence that suggest to you that that guy right there wanted Nicholas Leonard dead, and he wasn't going to stop till his head was crushed. Why didn't Megan call the cops when this was going on? Defense wants to, make her seem like, oh, it wasn't so bad because, she didn't call the cops when he's in there beating up on Nicholas Leonard. Well, first of all, he doesn't call the cops either, right? All the things that they want to blame Megan Brown for not doing in this situation is where she's running across the room, and she's going into the other parts of the house, that she could have called the cops if something was wrong. Well, he doesn't do that either. In fact, what he does is he hunts them down in the master bedroom. Hunts them down. Goes right through the main part of the house. Could have gone out the front door, could have gone out the back door, could have gone downstairs, could have picked up his phone. He could have done all sorts of things. At that very moment, according to him, he had just been attacked and choked. That's not what he does. You want evidence of premeditation? The fact that he changes location from the southeast bedroom to the master bedroom, piece of evidence goes to premeditation. He wanted to kill those people. He wanted them dead. So, armed with a gun, he goes in there and he shoots Gregory Brown in the closet. He's trying to arm himself and shoots Megan Brown, and she's in that room. Shoots them both in a situation where Gregory Brown's back's to him. How much of a threat could he be at that very moment? Right? I have to go hunt him all the way into the room, all the way into the master bedroom closet to confront him, but he's not even looking at me and shoot him. Well, there is evidence that a gun was loaded, and we heard through the testimony that a gun was loaded, but you never heard any testimony that a gun was jammed, right? The only reference to a bullet being in the rifle from the forensic examiner is that it was loaded. No one ever said the gun was jammed. This whole theory that he's shooting at him multiple times or he's trying and the gun's jammed. We have an experienced hunter who knows his guns. These are guns that he's had and used forever. He picks the one gun that jams on him twice. Not really reasonable. No evidence that the gun jammed, except for his testimony. The fact that he shot him twice, shot him dead, shot him once in the back, shot him in the chest area, 2 shots. Another piece of evidence to suggest to you that this killing was premeditated. Wanted him dead. Had an intent to kill, time to reflect, time to make a decision, evidence of intent to kill. When we talk about Megan, Megan's the last one in the chain of events that, according to at least the state, as we believe it to happen, that he shoots her, and he shoots her in the face. To shoot someone in the face, you have to be face-to-face with them, right? She's not turned her back, she's not back. He held a gun at her and shot her dead after he just killed 3 people. It's a single gunshot wound. And sometimes a single gunshot wound in and of itself may not be clear evidence of premeditation. But if you look at it in the facts of this case, and the chain of the events that had happened, and the fact that he's chasing him down and he's hunting him down, it's clear evidence of premeditation. So, there is evidence of premeditation. It's been all presented to you, and sometimes in a painstaking manner. But we wanted you to feel comfortable with the things that we're going to tell you, right? We want to show you the whole story to the best of our ability. Let's talk about this, because the defense wants you to believe that the killings were done by a justifiable use of deadly force. That's the legal term for self-defense. So I'm going to take a minute to go over the instruction as it relates to that, because it's a little bit longer than the one that the defense showed you, and you're going to get a copy of it. I'm going to take a minute to go through it because it's super important in this case, because there are some things that are worthy of explanation. It is like the defense said, it read, is that in deciding whether Adam Matos was justified in the use of deadly force, you must consider the circumstances by which he was surrounded at the time the force was used, right? Let's talk about those quick circumstances. Surreptitious secret entry into a house, killing Margaret, if you believe just the state's version of the events of the order in which it happened and what Justin Oken said, but if you don't, there is a version where he goes in and he attacks these individuals in a room, doesn't announce himself. Right, the defense wants to say that he wasn't committing a crime when he went in there, but if he was going to be all on the up and up, he just would have knocked on the door. The danger need not have been actual. It means that he doesn't have to, his perception, you got to get into his mind at the time. So he doesn't have to perceive the danger to be real at the time, but to justify the use of deadly force, the appearance of danger must have been so real that a reasonably cautious and prudent person under the same circumstances would have believed that the danger could have been avoided only through the use of force. Well, this struggle that, according to him, with Nicholas Leonard is really a fight for Nicholas Leonard's life, right? Here he is there to protect Megan Brown. He arms himself with the weapon, and he's in there to protect them. He confronts them in the bedroom, and he comes after them. He is the one that interjects himself into this situation, and therefore he is the person presenting the danger in the room. And based on the appearances, and I'm back to reading, Adam Matos must have actually believed the danger was real. However, the defendant has no duty to retreat if he was not otherwise engaged in criminal activity and in a place where he had a right to be. So, does he have a right to be in the room after the 911 call, after the things that happened? I'm going to suggest to you that he doesn't, that they did not want him there, that they communicated that to him all through the day with all the phone calls that he was having, which is why he stayed away, which is why he really had to secretly enter the house. One of the parts I want to explain to you here is this. There's this presumption in the law, and I'm going to read it to you, okay? And it says, Adam Matos is presumed to have held a reasonable fear of imminent peril or death or great bodily harm to himself when using defensive force that was intended or likely to cause death. What the law is trying to account for here is that if you can believe or presume that his fear was reasonable, if he was going to have an imminent peril of death. This section and this presumption is for the person who's in their home at night in bed, right? An intruder comes knocking on the door, comes entering through the house. A homeowner is presumed to have fear when someone enters the house. It kind of gives them the right to shoot first and ask questions later kind of a situation when you're in your own home. Okay? He does not entitle to the presumption of his fear because he secretly enters that house. Okay? So when you read this idea of the presumption that he may have, he's not entitled to it because he secretly entered the house. There are two things that go along with this presumption. And I'm bogging down in the weeds because it's kind of important for you guys to understand that it says that he's entitled to the presumption if the person upon whom the defensive force was used in the process of unlawful and forceful entry, or they unlawfully forcefully enters the residence. So this is a situation where someone breaks the door and enters your house, right? Well, he secretly enters the house. He doesn't break in the house. If there was a break-in, you're in your home in bed, you hear a door crash in, you go downstairs with a gun, a knife, or whatever, shoot first, you're presumed to have the fear because someone's entering your home, your castle. Or Adam Matos knew or had reason to believe that an unlawful and forcible entry or unlawful and forcible act had occurred. Well, he's the one entering into the residence. Again, he's the one interjecting himself in the situation. He's not entitled to that presumption. It tells you, and it goes through and says that the presumption of fear of imminent death or great bodily harm does not apply if. And it gives you two ways that it does not apply. It says, one, or A, that a person against whom the defensive force is used has a right to be there, is a lawful resident, or those type of things. Well, he was told not to come back, right? It was very clearly communicated to him. He stayed away all day and secretly enters that house. He's not entitled to this presumption of fear. Or the person who uses defensive force is engaged in criminal activity. Well, in this case, as it relates to the justifiable use of force, well, depending on which version you believe, there are multiple killings in this scenario, right? So the fact that, as it relates to Margaret Brown, there's no justification and there's no heated passion. He waited for her or snuck in with her and bludgeoned her to death, hogtied her, and beat her head in with a bag over it. Not entitled to any type of defense as it relates to that. As it relates to the other individuals, as it relates to Nicholas Leonard, he beat him so senselessly and crashed his head in. He's not entitled to some sort of self-defense claim that I just tried to, I saw it, he came after me, and I was able to escape. Well, it's very clear under his version, he was able to escape, and he wants to say he's either unconscious, not dead, and they're in the other room. That's the perfect opportunity to leave. He doesn't take it. He doesn't call 911. He's not entitled to any type of self-defense as it relates to that. And let's just talk for a second about his retelling of the events. The court's going to tell you that in the instructions that the fact that he testified, you as jurors have to treat him just like every other witness that testified. He gets no extra credit as to the testimony. He is not somehow more believable because he's the defendant in this case. You have to treat his testimony just like everyone else's. And with that, if you believe all, some, or even none of his testimony, you can completely discard it. Just like you can discard any other witness in this case. So when we ask him questions, he's like, I'm fuzzy on that. I don't remember. Or his answers were most likely, which, he's the eyewitness there because he killed all the other eyewitnesses. He's the one that knows. Clearly he's the one that knows. Well, but his answers are most likely, and I'm fuzzy on that, and he wouldn't miss any opportunity to tell you that. At any given moment, he was afraid for his life, regardless of what the situation was. His testimony is not credible. It's not supported by the other evidence in this case. I'm just going to take a second because we haven't discussed it up to this point. The Supreme Court indicates that you are to be instructed on all crimes that are charged, right? Defense kind of gave you some analogy as to what was manslaughter and where it falls in this case, but the court is going to give you a verdict form and the instructions in this case. And the law says you start at the highest crime charged. That means when you go back in that room and you elect a foreperson to guide your discussion, that where you start your discussion is at murder in the first degree. And you start with each count individually. The fact that they're all tried together is for your benefit, but the evidence stands as to each individual one. A decision as to count 1 does not affect your decision as to count 2. The evidence is what should guide your decision as it relates to those two things. You start at the highest crime that's charged, murder in the first degree. You decide if he committed it. You decide whether or not any of the defenses that he's somehow suggested to you work. There are certain questions. We call them questions of fact. They're going to be on your verdict form. These questions of fact pertain particularly to counts 2 and 3 because that's where he kills Megan Brown and Gregory Brown, and he uses a firearm. So there's specific questions of fact as it relates to the firearms in this case. And I'm not going to bore you with the law in it because you're going to get to read it and hear it multiple times tomorrow. But what the questions are is whether or not he used a gun. Did he have a gun? Did he possess a gun? Did he just discharge the gun? In doing the discharge, did it lead to the death of a person? Well, his own testimony, as it relates to the questions of fact, you can answer all of these questions in the affirmative as it relates to these questions. They're going to be under anything related to count 2 and count 3. But there is this thing in the law called the lesser included defenses. Lesser included offenses. And as it relates to each count in the indictment, as to count 1, count 2, count 3, count 4, there's also the crime of murder in the second degree. So if you feel that the evidence does not support a conviction for murder in the first degree as to any of the 4 victims, then you would move down to the next step. You would say, okay, has the state proven to us whether or not there was a murder in the second degree? And you're going to kind of see that there are, as you move down this ladder, that there are the elements or things that we have to prove to you fall off. Primary difference between a murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree is that a murder in the first degree is done with the intent to kill, that evidence of premeditation that I spent some time talking to you about. But there's also the crime of murder in the second degree, of depraved heart mind, where you do an act, but you're so blinded by it that you do not have an intent to kill. I'm not going to go over all those pieces of evidence that go to premeditation because I think we spent a fair amount of time going over that. But it's those pieces of evidence that I want you to think about as to why this is not a murder in the second degree. The hunting down, the use of the weapons, the changing of locations, the type and the nature of injuries, the repeated nature of the injuries. These are things that suggest to you that it's not a murder in the second degree. And then if you don't find that, then the next one down is a manslaughter. Manslaughter, I think the analogy that was been given to you is one of a traffic accident. Sometimes, I guess the most common one is a DUI manslaughter, where someone gets intoxicated at a bar, gets behind the wheel. They have no intent to kill a person, but they commit an act that they should reasonably know could lead to the death of someone. And in doing so, they kill someone. Okay? The evidence in this case suggests to you far more than a manslaughter. It is not a murder in the second degree. It is a specific crime. It is the killing of multiple people in a home at that night with the intent to kill. But there is one more thing that the court's going to instruct you, and I just want to read it to you. It's called abnormal mental condition, because the defendant wants to tell you all the things that are bad for them. He wants to separate himself from, right? It's only natural, but he did it consistently and repeatedly, separating himself from those things that aggravate this case. The bag wasn't on the head. I put the bag on after. He was unconscious when I hit him 21 times and led to his death. I was lost. I was shocked. I was in this state of unknowing. This 4-hour period, according to him, between the deaths of the individuals upstairs as he lies in wait for Margaret Brown. the law says that mental illness, abnormal mental condition, or in this case, diminished mental capacity, is not a defense to any crime in this case. That any such evidence may not be taken into consideration to show that the defendant lacked the specific intent, that mens rea that they talked about, or didn't have the state of mind essential to proving that he committed the crimes charged or any lesser crime. This state of shock that he's in is because of the horrific things that he did at his own hands. He is not entitled to any benefit or any defense in the law as it relates to that. And you're going to hear that. The court's going to give you some instructions to guide you through your discussion, and I'm not going to go through that, but the court's going to lay it out there for you. And then you have to look at all the evidence. And the state kind of just, here you go. As much as we could give you and as details we can give you, and trying to be as respectful of your time to show you the evidence in this case. And to suggest that we're trying to hide the story or try to give you some other alternate way is really, you know, when you take the evidence back, you get to decide if we're trying to hide something from you. We want you to make a decision in this case. We give you the evidence because you're the fact finders. You don't have to listen to what I say. You don't have to listen to what the defendant says. You only have to listen to the evidence in this case. Ladies and gentlemen, when you look at the evidence in this case and you decide the order in which things happened, you have a house where 4 people died on August the 28th of 2014. An entire family was wiped out. Adam Matos killed those people because he wanted to kill them. He lied in wait. He enters the house secretly. He bludgeons them in a brutal murders. He tries to conceal evidence. He tries to hide evidence. He is deceptive on all the things. And why is he doing all that stuff? Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's not because he didn't think the cops wouldn't believe him. It's because he didn't believe it. You think he thought he had that actual discussion in his head, well, I'm not going to call the cops because they're not going to believe me, or I'm just going to clean up everything. He cleaned up everything because he knew he was guilty of murder in the first degree as to all 4 individuals. He knew it. And now you know it. So tomorrow, when the judge reads you these instructions as to the law, you need to go back there, pick a 4th person in the jury, review the evidence that you want. But the decision as to what crime he committed is fairly clear in this case. Adam Matos is guilty of murder in the first degree for killing Margaret Brown, Megan Brown, Greg Brown, and Nicholas Leonard. He did so with premeditation. He did so because he wanted to. And he did so in a brutal and horrific fashion. Thank you.